A single blood-red slick of iron ore dust that is all the SS George Stephenson saw before the SS Cyprus simply ceased to exist. In 1907, the Cyprus was the pinnacle of maritime ambition, a steel leviathan so advanced she was declared immune to the temper of the Great Lakes. Yet, in the blink of an eye, she was erased from the water, leaving no trail, no wreckage, and no answer. This was no ordinary accident. How does a titan of modern engineering vanish into thin air, leaving behind not a single soul to tell the tale? Was this the fatal flaw of an untested design? Or did we witness the exact moment human hubris collided with an ancient, unforgiving force? The Cyprus was only the beginning of a haunting, systemic silence across these inland seas. What truth lies buried in the freezing dark, defying every law of maritime science we hold as gospel? I invite you to stay with me until the very end, as we reconstruct the evidence that the lake has spent over a century desperately trying to bury. And as the veil of secrecy is lifted, you will be forced to question everything you think you know about what truly lies beneath the waves. In 1907, the American shipbuilding company found itself tasked with constructing a new, revolutionary class of bulk freighter for the Lackawanna Steamship Company. Yet the vessel was birthed into a tempest of economic anxiety and social unrest. The Panic of 1907, a severe and paralyzing financial crisis, had gripped the nation, and the shipyard itself was crippled by aggressive, protracted labor strikes. To satisfy investors desperate for returns, the company pushed forward with a frantic intensity, inadvertently forging a vessel that was magnificent in design, but fatally flawed in execution, a reflection of an era obsessed with growth at the expense of the meticulous caution that maritime construction demanded. The Cyprus, hull number 353, emerged as a true marvel of the Gilded Age, a shimmering promise of the industrial future. Stretching 420 feet in length with a 52-foot beam, she was designed to carry a staggering 7,500 tons of iron ore, positioning her as a titan of the Great Lakes trade. Her engine room was equally impressive for the time, housing two massive, coal-fired Scotch boilers that powered a 1,500 horsepower triple expansion steam engine, a robust, intricate setup meant to tackle the heavy, relentless traffic of the Great Lakes. She was launched on Saturday, the 17th of August 1907, christened by Hazel Arnold, the daughter of a key executive at the Pickens Mather Company, which held a majority share in the Lackawanna venture. She was, in every sense, a vessel of profound, almost intoxicating human ambition, a symbol of man's supposed conquest over the elements. At her helm stood 48-year-old Captain Frank Brainerd Hike, a veteran with 28 years of grueling experience on the lakes. Hike was a man who had weathered the storms of both the unforgiving water and the cutthroat labor market. His career had been temporarily derailed by the 1903 Masters and Pilots strike, which saw him blacklisted as an agitator, but being offered command of the Cyprus was, in his eyes, his professional redemption. He viewed her as a good ship working for a first-class company, believing his future was secure. Beside him were dreamers like 17-year-old Nathan Lee Spencer, the eldest son of a postmaster. Nathan had abandoned a potential government career, entirely captivated by the allure of marine engineering and the promise of the Cyprus's innovative Scotch boilers. He was the youngest of a crew of 22 men and one woman, the second cook and wife of the steward, William Dundon. There was an air of professional satisfaction and quiet pride on board. They believed they were not just sailors, but integral parts of a long and prosperous future for the Lackawanna Line. On Thursday, the 10th of October 1907, at 9 a.m., the Cyprus departed Superior, Wisconsin, heavily laden with 7,103 tons of iron ore, a weight that left her riding low in the water, barely 300 tons shy of her absolute maximum capacity. The voyage began in calm, deceptive, but by 10 a.m. the following morning, the atmosphere had soured into something ominous. 10 miles south of Sisquit Light, the upbound freighter Charles O. Jenkins encountered the Cyprus. Captain Smith of the Jenkins observed the new ship rolling heavily in the moderate swells, an observation that triggered a quiet, instinctive alarm in his veteran heart. He kept his eyes on her, waiting for a signal of distress that never materialized, and the two ships passed in a tense, unsettling silence, the Cyprus already beginning to struggle against the lake's awakening power. By noon, the Cyprus crossed paths with the George Stephenson, about 18 miles off Deer Park, Michigan. Captain Harbottle of the Stephenson noted that the Cyprus was maintaining nearly double their speed, easily cutting through the rising, choppy storm. But Harbottle noticed something profoundly, chillingly unsettling: a blood-red wake trailing behind the freighter. This was the unmistakable, terrifying sign of massive water ingress. As the waves washed over the spar deck, water was infiltrating the hatches, mixing with the fine iron ore cargo and being pumped back out by the ship's internal systems, creating a rust-colored, murky trail of death that stained the pristine blue of the lake. Despite this, the crew of the Stephenson felt a degree of lingering comfort, stubbornly believing that a modern steel vessel of her size would naturally overcome these conditions. As night fell, the wind surged into a full howling gale that seemed to scream for the ship's destruction. Second mate Charles Pitts, having just woken for his shift, found the ship not merely pitching, but developing a stubborn, dangerous list to the port side that resisted all correction. An urgent, panicked inspection of the hold revealed the horrifying reality. The cargo had shifted, and water was pooling significantly in the lower spaces. The modern telescoping hatches, which had been marketed as the absolute advancement in loading efficiency, were proving utterly incapable of maintaining a watertight seal under the pressure of the sea. By 6:45 p.m., the list was undeniable and rapidly worsening. Captain Hike, realizing the sudden gravity of their situation, ordered the forward crew to move aft, don their life jackets, and prepare the lifeboats for a desperate evacuation. Yet, he stopped short of the definitive abandoned ship command, still grappling with the impossible, soul-crushing decision between holding the ship together for a few more minutes or committing his crew to the mercy of the raging, freezing lake. The final descent was swift and brutal. At 7:30 p.m., the ship's port side, sheer the crucial structural junction where the spar deck meets the hull, dipped beneath the churning, violent surface, forcing a terminal, unrecoverable 20-degree list. 5 minutes later, the engine room was silenced. Chief Engineer James J. Norcross sent word through the internal lines that they had lost steam pressure and the boilers had gone cold, leaving them dead in the water. Captain Hike looked at the men remaining with him in the pilot house and delivered a final, somber, and resigned verdict. It's all off now. At 7:45 p.m., the Cyprus capsized, turning turtle in the black freezing water. The men in the pilot house managed to unlash a forward raft just as the ship rolled onto her port side, casting them into the frigid black torrent. In the subsequent chaos and freezing darkness, only Charles Pitt survived. He endured 6 hours of unimaginable agony, paddling the raft through a gauntlet of 18 miles of storm-tossed, icy water. At Duayam, within sight of the dim shoreline near the Deer Park life-saving station, a final, monstrous wave capsized the raft. throwing pits into the freezing surf. With the last flickering remnants of his strength, he clawed his way to the sand, alone and shivering in the dark. When he was finally discovered by a patrolling surfman, he possessed the breath for only one final word: Cyprus. 22 souls were lost that night. The immediate aftermath of the Cyprus disaster sent a profound, destabilizing shockwave through the maritime community, leaving industry leaders in a state of frantic, defensive disarray. They struggled to reconcile the incomprehensible loss of such a state-of-the-art vessel, a masterpiece of industrial ambition, with the violent, unforgiving, and primordial reality of Lake Superior. In the days following the ship's disappearance, theories proliferated as rapidly as the storm that claimed her. Whispers of mechanical failure dominated the docks of the Great Lakes. Some veteran sailors speculated that the labor instability in Lorain, Ohio, had resulted in subpar engineering or even deliberate, quiet sabotage during the ship's hurried construction. Others pointed an accusatory, trembling finger at the Lackawanna Steamship Company, blaming corporate negligence for committing a green ship new, untested, and unproven to the brutal, icy teeth of an October gale. However, as investigators began to peel back the layers of this tragedy, it became clear that the tendency to scapegoat individual crew members or the shipyard workers was merely a convenient, superficial distraction from a much more insidious and systemic failure: the dangerous, blinding, and fundamentally fatal arrogance of modern Gilded Age design. The true culprit behind the sinking was not a lack of individual courage or a flaw in the crew's spirit, but a critical, catastrophic oversight in the Cyprus's innovative telescoping hatch covers. In an era obsessed with the hyper-efficiency of rapid loading and unloading, these hatches were marketed as the definitive, profitable future of the Great Lakes fleet. They were ingeniously engineered to slide open and shut with minimal human effort, ostensibly eliminating the arduous, time-consuming, and expensive labor of manual covering. Yet, in their singular pursuit of mechanical perfection and corporate margins, the designers omitted the vital protection of traditional, time-tested tarpaulins, the heavy, reinforced canvas sheets that had served as the maritime industry's last, reliable line of defense against the elements for decades. Blinded by the aesthetic and operational elegance of their new system, the engineers arrogantly assumed that a tight, steel-on-steel fit would suffice against the infinite power of the lake. They were profoundly, tragically wrong. Under the relentless pounding assault of Lake Superior's heavy October seas, these hatches proved to be anything but watertight. Each successive, mountainous surge of water that washed over the spar deck did not merely drench the cargo. It infiltrated the hold, turning the fine-grained iron ore into a heavy, viscous, and dangerously unstable slurry. As the ship rolled, this saturated cargo began to shift, catastrophically compromising the vessel's center of gravity. The Cyprus was effectively doomed by a so-called innovation that foolishly ignored the basic, century-old necessity of a completely waterproof seal, trading the lives of her crew for the promise of faster turnaround times. Decades faded into the gray obscurity of history, and the Cyprus became little more than a whisper of a ghost story, a tragic, forgotten footnote in the vast, cold annals of Great Lakes lore until the summer of 2007. That year, the Great Lakes Shipwreck Historical Society finally located the wreck, sitting upright and remarkably, hauntingly intact in the icy, dark depths. The high-definition, ethereal footage captured by their remote-operated vehicles provided a chilling, final verdict that verified the forensic theories of the past. The cameras confirmed that the telescoping hatches had indeed been the vessel's primary Achilles heel, showing the mechanisms forced, twisted, and completely out of alignment by the pressure of the water. Furthermore, historical records unearthed alongside the discovery revealed an even more damning, cynical truth. This was not the first time these hatches had betrayed a crew. Similar structural and sealing issues had been documented on sister ships, such as the Powell Stackhouse and the B.F. Jones, well before the Cyprus tragedy occurred. The industry had been warned of the inherent risk, yet the hubris of the Gilded Age consistently favored the allure of rapid, unchecked progress over the proven, life-saving necessity of safety. Perhaps the most haunting and poignant evidence of this institutional failure came from the descendants of the lost, whose grief remained etched in family memories for generations. The son of Captain Frank Brainerd Hike later recounted a memory that serves as a permanent, stinging indictment of the era's pride. His father had voiced deep, visceral, and unheeded concerns about the vessel's flawed design before her final, fatal departure from Superior, specifically warning that one should never sail another voyage without tarpaulins. It was a desperate, unheard plea from a man who had spent nearly 3 decades mastering the temperamental moods of the lakes, a seasoned veteran who intuitively recognized that his modern ship, for all its gleaming steel and raw steam power, was a death trap in waiting. He knew the lake did not care for their newfangled inventions. He knew the lake only respected the old, hard-won rules of survival. The story of the Cyprus remains a cold, calculated lesson in the inherent, recurring dangers of institutional blind spots. It was not the lake that ultimately failed the crew. It was the failure to respect the environment by overestimating the reliability of nascent, unproven technology. The Cyprus stands today as a submerged, silent monument to a fundamental truth of the maritime world. No matter how much steel you forge, no matter how much raw, coal-fed power you harness, or how sophisticated your blueprints appear on paper, the lake always demands the humility of basic, time-tested safety standards. To ignore these, as the leadership of the Lackawanna Steamship Company did in their relentless pursuit of profit and efficiency, was not merely an error in engineering, it was a profound, calculated betrayal of the 22 men and 1 woman who entrusted their lives to the machine. They were pioneers of a sort, but they were sacrificed on the altar of progress, leaving behind a legacy that continues to warn us that in the battle between human vanity and the forces of nature, nature always has the final word. But the destruction of the Cyprus was not a singular, isolated anomaly in the history of the Great Lakes. Rather, it served as a poignant and deeply haunting reminder in a grim, accelerating sequence of maritime catastrophes that defined the opening decades of the 20th century. This pervasive arrogance of technology, the steadfast, misplaced, and ultimately lethal belief that modern steel hulls and powerful, coal-fired steam engines had finally conquered the temperamental elements, was not merely a momentary lapse in judgment by a few shipowners, but a deep-seated, systemic pathology that infected the entire maritime industry. We must cast our gaze back just 2 years to the autumn of 1905, when Lake Superior unleashed a cleansing so horrific, so sudden, and so total that it shattered the manufactured complacency of an entire generation of mariners. The tragedy of the SS Iosco in 1905 provides the foundational, undeniable proof that whether a ship was hand-built of timber by masters of the past or forged in the roaring, ambitious furnaces of the Industrial Revolution, Man's unyielding corporate pride remained the lake's greatest and most efficient catalyst for destruction. It leaves us to wonder as we look out over the deep, slate-gray waters. Have we ever truly understood the nature of our adversary? Or does there exist, beneath the dry, cold statistics of shipwrecks and drownings, an ancient, primordial power that science, for all its modern brilliance, remains fundamentally and humiliatingly unable to fathom? Launched in 1891 as Hull 80, the Iosco was a 312-foot masterpiece of white oak, standing as a proud, sturdy titan of the traditional wooden hull era. Yet, she was a vessel defined by dangerous, irreconcilable contradictions. Recognizing the changing, merciless tides of the post-industrial shipping economy, her owners had attempted to force her into modernity by reinforcing her aging wooden frame with heavy, intrusive steel bracing, intended to handle the crushing, dense weight of iron ore. This hybrid design, a desperate, calculated attempt to force a dying breed of wooden ship to perform like a modern steel freighter, was, in technical terms, a ticking time bomb. While she was powered by a respectable 1,000 horsepower steam engine, no amount of coal-fed mechanical power could ever compensate for the inherent terminal structural fatigue of a hull composed of wood, straining under the immense, shifting, and punishing weight of metal. Beyond the stark, unsettling mechanical engineering, the Iosco was haunted by a collective psychological burden that hung over her like a permanent, suffocating fog. Her reputation was inextricably and fatally tethered to the Olive Jeanette, a barge she frequently towed through the rough waters of the lakes, which had earned a chilling, whispered reputation among Great Lakes crews as a hoodoo ship, a vessel of cursed bad luck, following the mysterious and total loss of the SS Dodie in 1898. The sailors of the Great Lakes were a notoriously superstitious lot, and for good reason. They lived their lives on the literal razor's edge of survival, where the difference between life and death was often decided by a shift in the wind or a slight variation in a barometer reading. They spoke of these ships in hushed, reverent tones, sensing deep in their bones that the Iosco was bound to a dark, predetermined destiny that no amount of engineering could avert. Yet, these deep-seated maritime superstitions and the unspoken, visceral fears of the men who actually worked the decks were often arrogantly ignored in the climate-controlled, bottom-line-driven, and utterly disconnected boardrooms of Duluth, where the only thing that mattered was the tonnage of iron ore delivered. The Iosco departed from Duluth on the 31st of August 1905 under the command of Captain Nelson Gagnon, a mariner whose reputation for steadiness had been forged in the crucible of Superior's erratic temper. Behind her, trailing on a heavy steel tow line, was the barge Olive Jeanette. They were tasked with a routine iron ore delivery, but the horizon held something far more sinister. As they steamed into the teeth of an escalating weather system, the atmospheric pressure began to crater, signaling that they were steering directly into the center of a developing behemoth. For 2 brutal, exhausting days, the 2 vessels clawed their way through the increasingly mountainous swells of Lake Superior. By dawn on Saturday, September 2nd, the storm had escalated into a total cataclysm, with visibility reduced to a blinding swirl of gray water and freezing spray. Yet, at approximately 10 a.m., a fleeting, final sighting occurred. Captain Massey, commanding the steel freighter Mullins, caught a brief glimpse of the Iosco and the Olive Jeanette through a gap in the mist, roughly 20 miles east of the Huron Islands. They were struggling, battered by monstrous swells, but they were still a unit, the steel umbilical cord was still holding. It was the last time the SS Iosco would ever be seen by human eyes. As the Witch of September, the legendary, ferocious storm that would forever define the 1905 season reached its catastrophic apex, the Iosco was subjected to forces that no wooden-hulled freighter, even one bolstered by steel bracing, could hope to withstand. Forensic analysis, pieced together from decades of maritime records and the physics of shipwrecks, suggests that the Iosco's demise was not the result of a single, sudden impact, but the outcome of a harrowing, catastrophic synergy of mechanical failure and physical instability. Central to this grim theory is the snapback effect. As the gale intensified, the immense, pulsating strain placed on the heavy steel towing cable connecting the Iosco to the Olive Jeanette became an unbearable tension, a ticking clock of steel and stress. When the cable inevitably parted under the rhythmic, violent pitching of the vessels, it recoiled with the velocity and force of a massive, metallic whip. Such a violent snapback would have been more than enough to tear through the aging wooden superstructure of the Iosco's stern, potentially shattering the steering gear or breaching the hull, allowing the freezing, relentless ingress of the lake to begin its final work. Simultaneously, the Iosco was locked in a battle with a hidden, far more insidious executioner: cargo liquefaction. The fine-grained iron ore that filled her hold was deceptively dense, and when subjected to the prolonged, irregular vibration and the violent, agonizing rolling of the storm, it began to behave with terrifying fluidity. It shifted from a stable cargo into a viscous, unstable, and liquid-like state. As the Iosco tilted and tossed, the ore surged to one side of the hold, creating a massive, off-center weight that the aging, hybridized wooden frame was powerless to correct. This shifting mass, coupled with a structural compromise caused by the snap tow line, robbed the ship of her last riding moment. The final, horrifying climax of the Iosco's existence arrived not with a flare of distress or a frantic telegraph signal, but with an abrupt, silent surrender to the deep. She was essentially erased from the surface of the lake, claimed by the abyss without a single human cry heard by the shore. The final, tragic confirmation of this forensic sequence came on the afternoon of Sunday, September 3rd. When the lightkeeper at Huron Island adjusted his glass at 4 p.m., he witnessed a sight of total desolation. The Olive Jeanette was alone, shattered and waterlogged, riding so low in the surf that she was more a part of the lake than the sky. The SS Iosco, a 312-foot titan of the timber era, had simply vanished into the gray void. There were no lifeboats launched, no floating debris fields, and not a single survivor to recount the final moments. The hoodoo ship had lived up to her dark legend, surviving just long enough to witness the total erasure of her second master before she, too, was claimed by the abyss. In the harrowing days that followed, the lake began to surrender the grim, splintered evidence of what had transpired in the dark. The vessel, Juanita, tasked with scouting the area, eventually stumbled upon the fragmented remains of the Olive Jeanette. The identification of her name-board and the jagged, splintered wooden debris served as a chilling testament to the mechanical disintegration the ships had suffered. Yet, the Iosco herself proved far more elusive. She vanished into the black, silent depths of the lake, leaving no wreck site to be charted, no clear grave for her crew to rest in. She became a true ghost ship, swallowed by the Superior, until she was nothing more than a haunting memory and an enduring mystery. The true visceral weight of this disaster, however, was not found in the manifest of lost ore, but in the human suffering that eventually washed ashore near the Huron Mountain Club. Here, the lake deposited the final, heartbreaking remains of the crew. Among the recovered bodies was that of a woman, the assistant stewardess, known simply as Mrs. Barnes. When authorities examined her, they discovered an anatomical detail so harrowing it shattered the lingering hope that the Iosco had succumbed in a merciful instant. She was found in the grip of a cadaveric spasm, a rare, intense form of muscular contraction that occurs at the precise moment of death, effectively freezing the body in its final, agonizing physical state. Mrs. Barnes had died with her hands clenched so tightly into her own hair that they could not be pried open by those who found her. This singular, gruesome detail serves as a definitive forensic refutation of the theory that the Iosco sank in a momentary, merciful instant. It is a haunting testament to a prolonged, agonizing struggle. It confirms that the crew, Mrs. Barnes among them, did not pass away in the sleep of the deep. Rather, they spent the final, terrifying moments of their lives locked in a brutal, physical battle for survival. They were fighting against the encroaching cold, against the crushing pressure of the sinking ship, and against the crushing realization that their vessel was failing them. The image of those rigid, grasping hands transforms the Iosco disaster from a mere historical note about wood and steel into a visceral human tragedy. It reminds us that behind the clinical discussions of cargo density and snapback forces lie the real, visceral experiences of men and women who were forced to cling to their own existence as their world literally fell apart beneath them. The Iosco represents the ultimate lesson in the vulnerability of human ambition. Whether we are discussing the modern steel hulls of the Cyprus or the hybrid, reinforced oak of the Iosco, Lake Superior remains indifferent to our engineering and corporate bottom lines. The story of the Cyprus and the Iosco is more than a chronicle of splintered wood, twisted steel, and lost cargo. It is a somber meditation on the immutable power of Lake Superior. As the echoes of these disasters settle into the silence of the abyss, a harrowing truth remains. The lake recognizes no rank, no corporate title, and no engineering pedigree. In the face of her fury, the captain's vaulting ambition and the stewardess's quiet fear are indistinguishable. Both were equally insignificant. Both were devoured with the same cold, unrelenting finality. The legacy of these two tragedies is etched in the lives of the 26 souls lost with the Iosco and the 22 who vanished with the Cyprus. These are not merely statistics to be archived. They are the human cost of a generation's reckless sprint into the industrial age. The Iosco and her barge, the Olive Jeanette, left behind only scattered debris and the haunting image of a woman's final desperate struggle. The Cyprus, pristine and advanced, became a submerged monument to the perils of technological hubris, confirming that even the most modern vessel is fragile when stripped of basic, time-tested safety standards. This brings us to the haunting question that lingers long after the storms have cleared. Was this destruction the inevitable result of human arrogance? Or was it a form of retribution from a lake that refused to be mastered? The dawn of the 20th century was defined by an intoxicating belief in progress, a conviction that steel hulls and triple expansion engines had finally granted man dominion over the wild. Yet, in the graveyard of the Great Lakes, we see the inverse, a harsh, recurring reminder that our technological evolution has always been shadowed by our refusal to respect the environment that sustains us. And perhaps the ultimate lesson of the Cyprus and the Iosco is that no amount of engineering can substitute for caution, and no amount of ambition can shield us from the primordial power of the lake. The lake remains. The Cyprus and the Iosco lie in the deep, silent, and preserved, serving as eternal sentinels for future generations of mariners. They stand as a warning that while we may navigate the waters, we do not own them. We are guests in a realm governed by forces far older and far more powerful than our machines. And every time we prioritize the bottom line over the fundamental standards of safety, we are not conquering nature. We are merely inviting her to reclaim what was never truly ours to begin with. The tragedy is not just that they sank. It is that, even now, we must continue to ask if we have truly learned the lesson they left behind in the dark, cold depths of Superior. Finally, before concluding today's message, thank you for journeying with me through these haunting depths. If this story of ambition and loss resonated with you, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to join our crew for future expeditions. Do you have a personal reflection or a story about these maritime tragedies? Please share it in the comments below. Thank you for watching. I look forward to seeing you in our next voyage.